Welcome 330 students, Com 330. We are talking today about privacy and the rights involved with that. And the first question we look at is, what is privacy? And there can be many definitions. We're going to look at some of the legal definitions and some of the historical bases for the idea of a right to privacy. There was a Supreme Court judge named Louis Brandeis, and he said that privacy, it is the right to be left alone. It's kind of a play on words because you're talking about the right and then the left, but his concept was that it's the right to be left alone, that so that you don't have to be thrust in the spotlight if you've chosen privacy as the way you want to live your life. Now, in Europe, it's slightly different, and Europe actually has slightly different laws than we do here in the United States. In Europe, it is sometimes called the right to be forgotten, and there are actually rules in Europe that if you wish to have information taken off of Google and other places, you are allowed to do that, where that doesn't apply within the United States. But it's the right to be forgotten law in Europe that passed just a couple of years ago. So, different ideas of privacy. It is not, even in the United States, it is not settled law. In other words, it keeps evolving, and at one time it was more settled than it is now. But with new technology, it really upended everything, and so we are still looking at what is the the law going to be in the future, and to clarify certain things. So it is evolving. The law is evolving, and the reason is new technology. And so privacy is it's privacy versus change, privacy and privacy values versus technology. So they're trying to find a balance between those two. So you have the desire to get information on the internet, and the desire by some people to have privacy and to be left alone. Let's take a look at privacy history, and that'll give us some background of why we have these the ideas that we do. The interesting thing is that in Old England there was no privacy law before the United States was founded. There was no law that said you could have privacy in England. Also, another thing that you may not realize is the word privacy is not in the United States Constitution. It's not the word privacy specifically is not there. And some people say the reason was at the time that the Constitution was formed, a lot of Americans lived further apart. We tend to live closer together. There's many more people here. There weren't that many people back then. Even the cities tended to be further scattered apart. Back then, they invented social distancing long before we tried to make it fashionable. So that may have been one reason. But there's no word in the U.S. Constitution for that. Privacy was not considered an issue. However, current U.S. law, privacy law, is based on the concept of liberty, which is in the Constitution, and in the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and in the Constitution, and in the Constitution also in the Fourth Amendment. James Madison was the one who pushed for the Fourth Amendment. If you've seen the movie Hamilton, they make reference to him. I really like James Madison. He's not one of the people you normally hear about, one of the early presidents that everybody talks about. But he was actually a very principled person, and he would fit right in, I think, with many of our values today. He was pushing for some of the things that it's taken 200 years, really, to get. So he said, though, in the Fourth Amendment, that there should be no unreasonable search and seizure. And so we get the idea of privacy from that. No unreasonable search and seizure. You're not, privacy would be invading getting information about you, and that is implied privacy. So that's the basis on which we get a privacy law. Now, Now, some things changed the balance in the 19th century, particularly 19th century journalism. There were two eras that affected it. One was the penny press, and that was when um, really modern journalism was created. Everything we have now, the way we do things now, even online, really goes back to that. And so the penny press started when they began to have newspapers that could be purchased for a penny. They went to the common person. And in fact, there's some great stories about Chicago and how Chicago introduced that, and they didn't have. We won't go into that. Very interesting. Chicago held a big spot in the penny press, and that made newspapers more common, and people began to use them quite a bit. The second era was yellow journalism, and we talked earlier about the book The Jungle, and by Upton Sinclair. And he wrote that book about the meat packing industry, and there were stories about somebody would like fall into the grinder, and they didn't have time to take it out, so it would just kind of go in with the rest of everything, and there were rats and things running around. So the book was so powerful and so poignant that they actually began for the first time to regulate a lot of things, regulate the meat industry and other industries as well. Say we have rights as far as our food. But during that yellow journalism era where they were exposing things, there also were a lot of sensational, actually that part of that was the muckraking era afterwards, but that was caused by the yellow journalism era, and there were sensational stories that were coming out, and so people said, well, maybe people need a right for privacy, to have privacy. So technology helped change the privacy balance. A couple of things came out recently, not recently, but recently in historical terms, the last 120 years. Things that really changed things was the popularity of the microphone, the telephone. Interestingly, going way back, the Kodak camera, because Kodak was what made cameras usable for everyone. They came up with the first real camera, which for the masses, which was the Brownie, they called it, and it was a little brown box, and they still have vintage ones. And it was the first time that it spread to everybody could own a camera, and so privacy began to change because of that. Also, the dictograph recorder was one of those early things that were early pieces of technology that made people think about privacy law. Okay, and we could talk about more modern technology and things that have happened since then, but we're really looking at the foundation right now. So let's take a look at privacy torts. There are 4 of those in common law, and we've talked about torts before, so now we're looking specifically at privacy common law torts. So the first would be publishing embarrassing private facts. And we can all think of something that embarrassing that happened to us that we would just as soon forget. I had a friend one time who told me she was so embarrassed. She was at this was at another school, but she said it was raining and she slipped. And she said that was so embarrassing. Slipping on a sidewalk is the most embarrassing thing, she said. That's something I would think could happen to everybody. I wouldn't think it was that embarrassing, but I know when I do slip, I kind of look around to see if anybody saw me. But facts can get even more embarrassing than that. And so one of the first things in privacy torts is publication of embarrassing private facts. Now, there are 4 considerations for this, and do we have time enough to do this? Actually, I am going to stop right here. We will pick up the next video and talk about 4 considerations when looking at publishing a publication of embarrassing private facts. So I'll be right back. That always does that. I click that and